Good day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at the Center for Postgraduate Studies as we continue with a big project of ours that we do at the beginning of the year, which is the introduction to research for new postgraduate students, as well as for new academics who are going through the research supervision journey, as well as their own research. So today we will be discussing this idea of a supervision relationship, as well as how you can manage your supervisor. I know when you saw that topic, it was kind of shocking to see that, oh, I can manage my supervisor. So today I'm going to be sharing some of my experiences, but most importantly, I'm going to be sharing with you guys in terms of some of the questions that you can ask in something called a supervision agreement, which I'll be sharing with you today. Just before going into my presentation, I think it is important for you to know who I am. Funniest thing to be facilitating a session, whereas I usually introduce facilitators at the center. So I have to introduce myself in the process. Just briefly, my name is Asiphe Mxalisa, and I'm a lecturer at the Center for Postgraduate Studies. I recently submitted my PhD for examination, so I am in the anxious stage of my research journey, waiting for feedback and examination results and hoping for the best. So yeah, basically that's who I am. I didn't prepare bio, but I think that's all you need to know in terms of getting to know each other as we will be working together in this year's programming at the Center for Postgraduate Studies. I am trying to share my screen. Okay. I thought technology was not on my side today. So I'm going to switch off my video because we usually have a situation where a network cuts us in the office. So I don't want a situation where you are unable to hear the presentation fully. So today's presentation is on supervision relationship, how to manage your supervisor. So for the purposes of today, we will look at the purpose of the workshop, building a strong supervisor-student relationship, roles and responsibilities of both the supervisor, the student, or the candidate, key questions to discuss with your supervisor, the importance and the benefits of co-supervision. And in other universities, they have what we call supervision panels. Student roles in research process is something that we'll be discussing, as well as handling challenges and conflict resolution in your supervision relationship or supervision journey. And the last part will be to engage with questions, as well as responses, of course, from myself and also from the floor, and an evaluation, which is an evaluation link that is anonymous from the Center for Postgraduate Studies to evaluate this workshop, as well as other engagements that we have, so that we can have a better picture in terms of how we can better support you in this research journey, be it as a postdoc, as a postgraduate student, or as a supervisor. So looking at the purpose of this workshop, so if you ask a cross-section of postgraduate students in terms of what one of the best or the worst parts of doing their postgraduate studies is, you will realize that the response will be like most of them will likely to tell you something about their supervisor or supervisors. A supervisor can make or break a postgraduate degree process. It can make or break the relationship. And I have to say, I've heard too many terrible stories about students being poorly treated, ignored, or just inadequately supported by their supervisors. But these stories do make me wonder if there needs to be more thought put into how to choose a supervisor, how to build a supervision relationship, and then manage that relationship with the supervisor and the student in order to ensure that it works for both of the supervisor as well as the student as effectively as possible. So for this workshop, it is important for us to engage on the understanding of the supervisor-student relationship, the establishment of clear roles and expectations, the improvement of communication and accountability, and with that understanding, perhaps we'll be able to know how to address potential challenges and conflict resolution. I think there are students who go into their postgraduate studies with a huge expectation that the supervisors or supervisor will set the pace and tone for the project. I usually say that in a research project, if you take it as a car, you must be the one that is a driver. Sometimes when you're driving with our friends, we drive with friends that have got licenses, but there can only be one driver. The other person is a passenger, of course, giving directions, especially when it comes to blind spots. But most importantly, we know with passengers, it is important to feed the other snakes. So that is a supervision journey where you are the holder and the owner of your research. So that means the pace is not set by the supervisor. The pace must be set by you, as well as the tone of the project. That will ensure the issues of deadline are set and met, and so on, things that we'll be discussing today. Perhaps the expectation that supervisors are the one that sets the pace and tone is an expectation carried with them from undergraduate study, because with undergraduate studies, there's a lot of a 70-30% relationship in lectures and expectations. And I mean, if I look at my undergrad, we even had sessions where we were given scope in order to know what to focus on in our tests. While some supervisors may be well in this structure, especially when it comes to honors projects and master's projects, some are well in the structure because they already have projects that are funding these projects that the honor students and master students are doing. So that means they need to drive the pace because they've got deadlines to meet from or for the specific project that is funding these projects. But many are not, because you approach a supervisor based on their expertise, also based on the department that you're in, because you already have an idea of a topic or something that you want to work on. PhDs especially are as much about the actual research as they are about learning to become more self-directed, independent researchers who can eventually lead research projects and supervise others and so on in a PhD project. If you are doing a PhD project, you will realize when it comes to year 2, after the proposal has been accepted and you are starting to do the research, you realize that there is a creation of a learning and unlearning process between yourself and your supervisor. If you are lucky, you can get supervisors who knows and can acknowledge that even though they are the experts in the field you're researching, you are also bringing new information that they would like to learn more from because of the kind of work and the engagements and the literature that you would be having. So the importance of the supervisor-student relationship. This relationship is very important. To such an extent, here at Rhodes University, and I know other universities also have the same structure, there are multiple documents that are there to serve the protection and the effectiveness of the supervisor-student relationship. When I am sending you these slides, as well as recordings and links on email, I will send you, 1, the Higher Degrees Guide from Rhodes University. Number two, the supervision policy from Rhodes University. The nice thing about these documents is that here at Rhodes University, they were actually reviewed last year. So the supervision policy was reviewed, I think, around April 2024. So the one that we have is a new one. The Higher Degrees Guide, which was also sent to all postgraduate students, especially those ones that were in our CPGS list, I remember last year, towards the end of the year, was reviewed, but it only took effect from January this year. Now, it is very important for you to go and look at these policy documents, because outside of the supervision relationship, the other document also guides the issues and things and the uses of AI, for example, and the documents as well as the ethics application process, what it means, what you need to know. Because if you don't engage with these documents, you'd realize that by the time you are ready to submit your thesis, there might have been a process or a step that you might have missed, which is clearly articulated in these documents, and you can't say you didn't know. So that's the first important thing about maintaining this supervisor-student relationship. This supervisor-student relationship is very integral in terms of the research process. Because when you submit, you need the signatures of your supervisor. I know quite a lot of students who, by the time they submit their research projects, they are not even in talking terms with their supervisors. It is very important to not set that tone in your research process, because it doesn't only end from you clicking submit in terms of your thesis. There has to be publications coming out, as well as future research and future working opportunities that both you and the supervisor would be engaging in. The importance of this relationship, again, is that it enhances academic and professional development. It provides guidance, mentorship, and networking opportunities. So not only the supervision process is for the research project only, but it is also for I think there is someone who is trying to write in this presentation. Hopefully we are not hacked, folks. But if it's someone here, please switch off that editing thing. Okay, in case we are being hacked, we're going to stop this Zoom session, and then we're going to immediately start another one, and then we'll email everyone else. But anyway. This relationship requires mutual respect as well as understanding. Now, what are the roles and responsibilities of both parties? If you have any comments or questions, you can just type on the chats in order to ensure that I engage with those after the presentation. So let's start with the supervisor's role. The role of the supervisor is to provide academic guidance and feedback. It is to support the research development of the candidate, encourage publication and career growth, be available for meetings and discussions, as well as respect deadlines and the students' time. The process of publication, it doesn't mean that you need to wait for your supervisor to say when you can start publishing. The encouragement of publication, there are some supervisors who have advice on publishing after your PhD, for example, so that you can focus on the PhD work. It is their advice. It is not set in stone in terms of this is what you need to follow. Remember, as you are doing your postgrad studies, some of you want an academic career. That means it is also up to you to go and do that research in order to look at spaces where you can publish, and then come back to your supervisor to ask for advice, and also to see if these journals are actually legit journals, which is very important. Also, in some supervision meetings, where you actually explain to your supervisor your career growth, where do you see yourself? And from that discussion, you can end up with an opportunity where your supervisor is inviting you to do some work for them or inviting you to collaborate with them in some opportunities. And this has been my experience with my supervisors. So my PhD, it was supervised by Professor Sumakena as well as Dr. Kirsten Wilmot, whom I started working with and whom I've had different multiple projects, opportunities working with them, attending international conferences with them as well, and now we'll be co-publishing with them. But as we understand the supervisor's role, what then is the role of the student? The role of the student is to be the driver of that research, take ownership of the research. That means the student has to be proactive and be prepared for meetings. We will get into the details of who sets the meetings during the supervision journey. Maintain open communication, but also respect deadlines and supervisors' time. Often in this relationship in power dynamics is that it is always, in many cases, the supervisor that holds the upper hand when it comes to time. Where even though you can meet your own deadlines, the supervisor will submit their feedback whenever they have time, because of course they have a lot of students, they've got classes, they've got research, but it is important for you to outline in your meetings, especially at the very beginning of your research, that time and management of deadlines is of essence for you to finish at this specific time, a year or 2 years for masters, a year for honors, 3 or 4 years for PhD. So that means both the supervisor and the student will then respect the set guidelines when it comes to roles and times. We will go to those in terms of the supervision agreement. But outside of these nitty-gritties that we know in terms of roles and responsibilities, what are the roles and responsibilities of both parties? I've highlighted in bold, be human beings, empathy and authenticity. If I were to ask the participants here today, what do they think about this picture? I am particularly sure that most would actually speak about it as a therapy session. You can see there's someone who's sitting taking notes, and that could be a therapist. You can see a bigger couch for the person that is here for therapy. Someone else can say, the person in a red trouser is actually their supervisor giving feedback to the student, and the student is writing. Someone else can say, it is actually the supervisor that is writing because they're learning something and they need to go and engage literature in this. So when I started doing my PhD, I used the theoretical framework of intersectionality. Both my supervisors knew to some extent what intersectionality was, but in order for them to supervise my project, they needed to go and learn about intersectionality. So they were open to multiple articles that I would send them as they asked, so that they can be in the same page as me when it comes to my theory. By the end of my project, I'm sure they can speak about intersectionality in much more broader and much more engaging ways because they opened themselves to learning about that theory. So those could be the issues. But one important thing is you are looking at both the people that are in this picture, especially their faces, is that there is somewhat an extent of an exercise of empathy and authenticity. Empathy and authenticity allows you to know that your supervisor is also a human being. Your supervisor is not a machine that is there to continuously produce feedback to you, but they have a life. They are human beings before researchers. It goes up to you as well to also acknowledge yourself and have grace towards yourself that you are not just a student as your identity. You are a human being, but at the same time, not expecting your supervisor to be your therapist. So for you to build a relationship that has got empathy and authenticity, it is important to build trust and understanding. If you are unable to meet a deadline, that trust and understanding is via communication. That maintaining open communication to say to your supervisor that I am unable to give you this chapter on this day, but I can give you this bit of work that I've been doing because A, B, C, and D has been happening in my human life. Also acknowledging, it is very important for both of you to acknowledge each other's personal challenges and responsibilities. And that means you are building and fostering a supportive environment where you feel comfortable sharing your journey as well as sharing your struggles. It is also important to have and develop in your research journey, to have and develop emotional intelligence, where both the supervisor and the student are aware of their stress, their anxiety, but also the biggest thing in research, which is imposter syndrome in research. You won't have that if you are unable to encourage conversations about well-being and mental health, which is why we have a lot of postgraduate students who are suffering from mental health strain and issues. And they are hiding it because there are supervisors who plainly tells you that I do not care what happens in your life. I want my work and I want my work. But that means it actually also means the postgrad student is not aware of the boundaries and their own rights in order to communicate with their supervisors. But also, you could be advised of issues such as putting your studies in abeyance so as to focus on yourself and to focus on your healing, which means it stops the clock so that when you're ready to come back to your studies, you can come back to your studies. And those conversations are conversations that, of course, are in the policies in different universities, but also those are the conversations that you need to have with your supervisor. Many postgraduate students also are balancing a work-life balance. And I know from experience that it is not easy to register your postgrad as part-time because there are few, if not any, funding to fund part-time studies. So most postgrad students register for full-time since it is research and it doesn't require you to be at the institutions, and look for part-time jobs which are not permanent so that they are able to sustain themselves. So that means it is important to encourage a work-life balance. You need to be able to discuss strategies for managing workload without burnout. My current co-supervisor now, Sumai Kena, was also the director of the center where I worked. And we constantly had checking in meetings to balance, one, the workload that I'm being paid to do, but also two, the PhD that at times I was giving less attention to. So every single time we would joke around and say, if I want her to give me some advice and feedback on my PhD, I would say, hi, Professor McKenna, because she doesn't want to be called prof. And then when I'm engaging with her about work, I would call her so. But that took us a long time for us to reach a point where we actually know how to navigate both work as well as the supervision journey. It required an open conversation. It required an acknowledgement of responsibilities that I carry as an employee, as well as responsibilities that I carry as a student. So it is also important to actually, in order for you to maintain this relationship, it is important for you to normalize taking breaks and engaging in non-academic activities. Because once you are frustrated, your anxiety will grow, and that means it is a high possibility that you will take it out on the other party. The other important thing that I really wish supervisors can actually engage themselves in is the idea of mentorship beyond academia. When you speak about mentorship, I know it somewhat triggers young people a lot, because a lot of young people have been mentored to a point where a mentor doesn't know how to let go. A mentor doesn't know how to let you fly on your own. So mentorship for other people, it triggers them because they get to do the duties that the mentor doesn't want to do, but that is not mentorship. Mentorship is not bombarding your students with multiple projects, one, without compensation, but also two, without much of acknowledgement. That is not mentorship. Mentorship is about providing guidance on career, networking, and personal growth. It is about recognizing students' aspirations beyond research and academia. It is about supporting students in developing transferable skills for various paths. Mentorship is about realizing that there are some specific projects and fields that your student can run on her own because you have engaged with their work, because you have engaged with them. That's the type of mentorship that we're speaking about. Way before I finished my PhD, I was already co-presenting with Suma Kenna on many projects that she was invited in, but because she has engaged my work and she knows what are some of my strong points in theory and methodology, she would invite me to be her co-presenter. It is also important to acknowledge each other's strengths. So as you're working with your supervisor, you realize their strengths. In terms of communication, they are human beings, remember, be human. In terms of time management, some people, they say they are naturally late. I honestly cannot deal with people who can maintain time. I always try to be on time, but I know there are people who are religiously late. Those are the weaknesses of a person. So if you acknowledge your individual strengths and struggles, you are then able to recognize the different learning styles and personal challenges that can actually assist you to adopt a supervision relationship style that fits the needs of both you and your supervisor. Hence, the supervision agreement is not set in stone and it is not in a particular structure because supervision relationships differ. Also, it is important to handle setbacks with compassion. Now, I wish there were postgrad students here who are in their second and third year who can actually share some of their experience when it comes to feedback or experience when it comes to rejections of issues such as a rejection of a proposal or by the committee or a rejection of an ethics application. Those moments, or even the results that are coming back from our examinations where the results are saying you must resubmit. Those are calling for us to handle those setbacks with compassion because they are not failure. A postgrad student, especially master's level PhD, it's a very few percent of them who have to redo the entire project or even change a topic. Mostly it is resubmission. A resubmission is not a failure. Even when you submit to a committee for a proposal and they ask for a resubmission, you haven't failed. It is just a setback based on your timelines because you might have had timelines. So we must normalize that setback as part of the research process. We must provide encouragement and constructive feedback instead of pressure when the student receives this feedback of a setback. But at the same time, as a student, you must exercise compassion, empathy, for understanding that the results of whatever you receive is not the fault of the supervisor. Because if that is what your mindset is saying, then that means they were the expert in your research. You were just a passenger. And then moving on to the supervision agreement. So the supervision agreement at Rhodes University from the reviewed supervision policy has been attached as a document there It is multiple questions. Some I will do with you now if we have time, but this is an example of the beginning of my supervision agreement. So when I started my PhD, I had a PhD supervision panel. So it was a panel of 4 supervisors. This time it was 3, and then there was 1 that was added. And in that team, the supervision team would actually give me feedback based on their responsibilities. So here, Sue McKenna is my main supervisor, was explaining what each role briefly of each supervisor is. But most importantly, she sent me back to go and engage with the supervision policy and the higher degrees guide, so that I have a clear sense of what is expected from me, as well as what I can expect from the supervision panel. She then gave me an attachment of 27 questions to choose from, or even to take them all, before I met them in a meeting in order to discuss how we're gonna go about with regards to my project. Those questions were centered around meeting frequency and expectations, feedback process and turnaround time, authorship and publication discussions, handling disagreements and conflict, thesis submission and examination process. And these focuses were discussed just immediately, a month after I had officially registered for my PhD. So I was already having agreements about authorship and publication. Now, there's a reason why for such things. For example, let's take the first part, meeting frequency and expectations. There are questions that you might want to ask from your supervisor. In fact, some people even go around as to having a written agreement like this one so that you can go back to, where you send it to your supervisor with these questions, you respond as a student in terms of your suggestion, and then you allow your supervisor to respond in a different color in terms of that question and make a suggestion. After you have received that document, you then request a meeting with your supervisor to discuss these similar or different suggestions, make an agreement, sign it, store it, continue with your supervision and with your project. This is important because you can come back to the agreement when there are issues in your supervision. In fact, if it needs a third person to be involved or an office to be involved in case of unresolved conflicts, that document is a document that you can have in order to show, in order to show this is what we agreed on, but this is what is happening now. So under the first bullet, you discuss things like how often do we meet, when, and when. What is the longest we should go between meetings? Who sets the meetings? You remember I said we're gonna have a discussion about that. Do meetings follow submission of research work? Is a record kept of such meetings? Are we doing it on Zoom? Do I have to send an email to remind you about our outcomes of the meeting if we're meeting face to face? So those are the conversations that you can have on bullet 1. The feedback process and turnaround time starts from discussing the submission of written work. Does the scholar or the student submit rough ideas, such as, I know from my supervisors, I could write an email of a thought about a research about my research, or a thought about a specific chapter, just an email to see if I'm going into the right direction. That often worked for me to submit pieces of work instead of having a whole chapter returned if I submit the full thing. But for other supervisors, because of time and the number of students that they're supervising, they want drafts. So that means you submit a draft chapter or a draft proposal, and then they give you feedback based on that. Does the scholar submit small sections or whole chapters? How frequently is written work submitted? Those are some of the questions that can be handled in point number 2. Feedback, do you want feedback via emails? Or would you like for your supervisor to engage with feedback in a document? Very important. For example, during my master's submission in 2019, I received a resubmission. That resubmission had a physical copy of my master's thesis dissertation, and it had a red pen. So the external examiner who examined the thesis, who wanted it to be resubmitted to him or her, or they, had been writing in red pens, and the language was unsettling to read because sometimes when you get feedback, the language in supervisors is very important. So I could only do about 3 pages a day, cry and then do other 3 pages because the feedback was not crafted in a very calm and nice manner. And from there, saying something in red pen triggers me. So for me to be known by my supervisor that they can't use a red pen on a physical document because it triggers my traumas. It is a matter of communicating how I want to receive feedback. So you see, communication has been a word I've been using quite a lot because you can't have expectations, unmet expectations that result from uncommunicated expectations. So that is important. The third bullet of authorship and publication. Why is it important? I mean, it's your first year, first 2 months of your PhD, your master's, your honors. Why do you need to discuss publications already? It is important because, one, you get advice in terms of what are the good conferences to attend, where you can get funding for those conferences, and what aspects of the study should be presented at them, whose names are identified on the conference programs, and who presents at the conference. But also, when it comes to publishing, who becomes the first author? Now, I know there's huge conversations between academics in terms of who becomes the first author in a student's project, but also realizing that there are different requirements even for fields such as actual sciences, where there are experiments, labs, and an end. So it is very important to have a meeting with your supervisor or supervisors or panel to discuss in terms of when is co-authorship appropriate and when it is not. We deal with cases in university where a student finished their dissertation, submitted it without a supervisor's signature, but now they need to publish, and the supervisor is telling them they have to publish with them, and the supervisor is going to be the first author. And in that same process, the supervisor refuses to edit the articles or a book that came out from the student, but their name is there. And sometimes it is difficult to mitigate those issues because there was never an agreement in terms of who is going to be the author, the first author, which publications from these chapters are only for you to do. For example, right now, I am doing a chapter on my methodology and positionality. And that has got to do with my positionality and my research niche, the reason why I did the project that I did. I am the only author there. My supervisors are not co-authors because it is my personal narrative and I'm using the methodology that I came up with, which ties back into my positionality. So they understand. In fact, the proposal for that chapter was submitted to my supervisor to just read and see and give me any other pointers. And that's how we have built our own relationship. The handling of disagreements and conflicts is very important. We're going to do something around that quite very soon, as well as the important one, the administration and reporting. Some people come from universities where they constantly get communication of submission deadlines, committee meetings, but the universities are expecting you to do the work that you should do. where you go to these different departments' websites to see the committee meetings that will be sitting, so that you can give yourself deadlines in terms of when your proposal should be done so that you can serve in a committee, right? But it is important to also know what are the university's annual reporting requirements. What could or what would constitute unacceptable slow progress? Once you know that, you will realize you also have a responsibility to uphold, even though there has to be empathy when you are unable to write and you are unable to produce. Because you know there's a set limit of years that you must do your master's, you must do your honors, you must do your PhD. And if you don't put your studies in abeyance, that means the wheel is moving, your time is counting. So your supervisor, for as much as something is happening to you that is stopping you from being productive in terms of your research, has to actually offer you advice to either put your studies in abeyance or try and see what kind of support do you need to write in the midst of whatever you would be going through. Because the policies in universities are clear about what constitutes slow progress. And then this is submission and examination process that is also communicated. And if you are unsure and you don't know what are the deadlines, there are offices such as CPGs where you can actually email to find out about thesis submission, but also we do have the registrar's office that has these dates set, especially when it comes to thesis submission and how long the examination process takes, which is one of the biggest issues in universities, where you get people who had submitted their examination in October, but then there's an examiner that can examine it on time. And then there's one person who submitted in January who already have got their results. Remember, for as much as we understand your frustration in terms of that waiting period, there is also a little that universities can do to frustrate the process. The only thing that they can do is to keep on reminding the examiner to submit your examination report. So those are the things, and your supervisor holds no power in your examination process. She or he or they also waiting from the examination office. So those are the conversations or questions rather to discuss with your supervisor. And individual questions I will send as a document, but you can also find them from a supervision policy at Rhodes University. You can just type on Google the supervision policy of Rhodes University. You will see the updated one. It has got this supervision agreement questions. And now looking at co-supervision and its benefits. Other people have got co-supervisors, other people don't. Having co-supervision is very beneficial. One, you get to have access to diverse expertise, as well as a balance of workload for supervisors, especially towards the end of deadlines where a proposal has to be submitted and there's some edits that need to be done. Your supervisors can divide and conquer in terms of that workload. But also they might know each other or not, but they're also learning in this relationship to see what are the strengths of each and every one of them so that they can delegate themselves to you. Some supervisors know that, for example, as a supervisor, it would be difficult for me to actually push the student to submit when they're telling me something is happening. At the same time, I know that this is what they want and the deadline is tomorrow and I know they can do this. If I had a co-supervisor that knows how to communicate such things, it would be a process where I delegate to them in order to have a conversation like that. Because remember, we are human beings. And in this supervision relationship, we are also learning about ourselves and learning and relearning as well. It also offers additional guidance in specialized areas. Sometimes you get a supervisor that understands the field that you are trying to research in. but not the research focus that you have. So there would be someone else that understands the research focus, or someone else that is an expert in the theory that you want to work with. So that means you get additional guidance in specialized areas. However, with co-supervision, it also needs clear role definition for each supervisor. And that is also covered in the supervision agreement, where there are multiple questions that you can choose from in terms of what is the role of the co-supervisor. Do any of the supervisors provide expertise in a particular area or take responsibility for supervising a particular aspect of your study, or they supervise the whole thing? How will we ensure that all members of the team are informed of discussions, progress, and ideas? How will conflicting advice from the supervisors be dealt with? How will feedback be received? So it is very important that, especially if you work with supervisors that are not from the same institution and that don't know each other that well, and they've met via email because you went out to look for the supervision, and then you were told by a department that you can bring this person from outside that most probably you had a relationship with, but they can only be a co-supervisor at Rhodes University. Meaning there has to be a role that they are clear about, even though they knew you from 3 years ago, 2 years ago, in order to ensure that we mitigate conflicts, but in order to ensure that people know what their role is, especially when it comes to feedback, that you also don't favor one person's feedback against another person's feedback, but you receive both feedbacks and say when you want it. Either one supervisor does their feedback, send the document to the other, and the other sends it to you. If having multiple documents actually triggers your anxiety in some way, those are the communication that only you can have. So there is also a student's role in the research process. 1, you need to be in the driver's seat. 2, you must bring in the energy and initiative to meetings. You must also follow up on agreed actions. This is your project. Ownership means you've got to be accountable to yourself regarding the project. Seeking additional support when needed, reading groups, writing groups, critical readers of your work, presenting in spaces and conferences and tremendousnesses that I'm going to tell you about at the end, so that you actually craft a strong research and understand what the supervisor needs. You can have conversations if even after a meeting you can't understand what your supervisor wants from you, where you engage with a friend or a colleague to say, can you please explain what this comment means by reading this particular document? So here's a funny explanation in terms of what other people view a great student is. This is what your mom thinks, because they're thinking we're lazy to go to the working force and we just want to study and sleep. And then this is what your supervisor thinks, that you're on Netflix chilling with a glass of beer or a glass of wine, and the society thinks, oh my word, she's doing PhD, she's a rock star. And then your friends, I think, there is a doctor in the house, even though most probably we are only doctors in different fields. And then this is what you think you are doing, working really hard, juggling a lot, but that's actually what you are doing. So it's quite nice. I saw a lot of them. But the last thing that I want us to discuss in the supervision relationship is how to handle challenges and conflict resolution. This one is easy. The way you handle conflict resolutions as a human being with your different relationships affects or it grows your supervision relationship. If you are not used to apologizing to your friend, to your partner, to your parents, you won't be able to learn how to apologize to your supervisor when you know you are wrong. So conflict resolutions is something that we need to center in our lives, learn and unlearn our habits of dealing with conflict. Because if you are a person that has always been entitled, they never learned how to navigate their entitlement, You would be one of the students who write long emails to the VC about their supervisor without letting the supervisor know about these issues because they don't want or they've never learned to have open and honest communication. They have never done the supervision agreement or working relationship agreement and never addressed issues as early as they were happening. Now you seek mediation and institutional support when it is not yet necessary because you've never done the other things. But it is important to seek mediation or institutional support, especially if you have reminded your supervisor about your agreement and they still say no, they're not going to do something. Or if you, as a supervisor, you've reminded the student about your agreement and they say otherwise. So that means you've tried to address the issues with them. You've tried to seek institutional support in terms of your department, HODs, post-grad coordinators, and then you take it to the research officers that can handle issues of mediation when it comes to your research. This is a beautiful picture that shows one, don't point fingers, use I in statements, maintain a calm tone, know when to apologize. And as I've said before, we are human beings, so we need to navigate everything with compassion, empathy, and care. So basically, that is all from my presentation on supervision. Please scan this QR code. My colleague, or SA2, will also send you a link to evaluate this workshop. And I will now open it up for questions quickly. I think we have about 8 minutes so that I can address them. I'm gonna go to the chats now to see if there are any questions that you may have. And please raise your hand or you can unmute yourself so that we can have this conversation. Okay, so I see there is a comment from Nomtamene who is saying this information is very helpful. Thank you very much, Ms. Mxalisa. I just applied for my PhD and I would not like to repeat the same mistakes from my master's. That is true, Nomta. And in honest, I had a conversation with someone when it comes to PhD, and the question we asked ourselves was, do you look for a supervisor or do you look for a university when you're applying for a PhD? Most of us have stayed in one institutions because it was easier to get funding. We also had jobs in the same institutions. We also had relationships in the departments that we're doing our postgrad in. So we just applied for our honors and our masters in the same institution. But when you are reaching your PhD, you learn some of those things that actually I need to go out. Who do you follow? Do you look for a supervisor? Who do you contact first before submitting an application? Do you contact a supervisor or do you just send an application? If I can tell you how many applications I got rejected in terms of PhD because there was no supervision capacity in the university. That's because I applied to a university thinking they might have someone that can actually supervise my study. Or looking at the fact that you want to bring someone from, for example, Nelson Mandela University to supervise you, but you don't know what is the policy on supervision in this institution. Yet you apply there because you think you have a supervisor. When you get to the institution, they're like, oh no, we don't allow outside people to supervise. So that is very important to actually find out just before making that decision, because many of us, just like what Nomta has said, we are really traumatized by our previous postgrad studies, master's honors, to a point where when we reach PhD, it becomes difficult. A supervisor may be unresponsive or provide vague feedback that comes from Boisani, which is delaying progress sometimes. How does one resolve such? So even if you had started with your PhD or master's or honors journey already, and you have a supervisor you're working with, you need to send them a policy, the policy of supervision that I sent you. And then you make a polite suggestion that, hi, Prof. So-and-so, Dr. So-and-so, I attended a session at the Center for Postgrad Studies at Rhodes, and they were explaining this policy and this agreement. Would you be open for us to have a conversation about this so that we can have an agreement regarding feedback or regarding meetings. That is one way of dealing with this, Vuyisani. But the second part is the most interesting thing that I love doing ever since I heard about it. And I only heard about it in PhD, imagine. That feedback is not corrections. So when a supervisor sends you comments in your document that says, grade, continue, you are allowed to reply to that feedback and say, thank you very much for this. May I understand, do I continue with A, B, C, and D, or does that mean this whole document has been written properly? Is it okay if we can meet so that I can understand this comment better? Many people think when you are dealing with feedback or engaging with feedback, especially in those track changes and comments on the side of the Word document, it means you must make sure that you have no comment at all on the side for you to resubmit something. That is flawed. You can continue with the whole document, but add your own comments. Send an email, be the driver of your research, and say, hi, Prof, I hope you are well. Kindly find the resubmission and please take note of my comments in terms of your feedback or my feedback. I had so many interesting feedbacks after finding out that power that I have, which I didn't know, because I thought you receive feedback, you fix whatever your supervisor says you must fix, you continue. I would actually even attach an article because supervisors will be like, where did you take this from? Attach an article to say, here is the article that I've taken this from. Attach a comment to say, I really do agree with this focus. But if you remember, one of my objectives is this, and therefore this fits here, because they're not trying to fight with you. They're actually trying to understand your project as well. So make them understand. So, oh, were my slides stuck? I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry about that. Adding to Vuyisani's question, how do you balance being understanding and being firm with your supervisor pertaining to feedback and unresponsiveness? Because at the end of the day, you will suffer as a student if this happens. At the end of the day, you still want a good professional supervision with your supervisor. Mxalisa, with regards to that, I think the most important part again is that supervision contract conversation, but also it is important to engage the policies in your university. This idea that we do not have power in our research projects and supervision comes from this idea that we've been told that you're working with an expert and therefore they the knowers and you must be the receiver of their knowledge. That is flawed, and we need to send out the information that speaks to this quite well, because it is important for you to understand that in actual fact, it is okay for you to request feedback in the unresponsiveness of the supervisor. Don't send them a text. Send them an email replying to the email that you have sent. Remember, with the open door of being a human being and exercising grace to the other person. Because sometimes you might be angry that actually this is not helping in terms of my timelines. This is what I need to be. Asiphe is not giving you feedback, only to find out that Asiphe is facing grief, that they might not have communicated with you. So from the tone of your email, you maintain a professional, compassionate tone, reminding them about their work, so that it is also their responsibility to communicate when they are unable to give you feedback, and that's okay. If a supervisor emails you and they're telling you, I have a lot of workload this month, is it possible for me to give you your feedback next month? But in the meantime, work on A, B, C, and D. So that means at least they've given you a directive instead of having those supervisors who just keep quiet. And in many cases, the people who actually just keep quiet are students themselves, where they vanish. So I'm gonna send the slides because I see that they were stuck. I think I missed this, but how does one seek or request to have a co-supervisor? Do you just approach your main supervisor? My advice would be to approach your main supervisor, especially if you are already doing the research project, to suggest a person to them. Remember, you would have read your supervision policy. You know what are the requirements of having external supervisors or supervisors within the institution, but from a different department, because you're bringing, for example, a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary research. As they are open to the idea, you then go and approach the person. What we do is that you already have built a relationship with your supervisor and an agreement. They've put effort into your project. You go out and look for a co-supervisor. You tell your co-supervisor that actually you are coming to this project, and then you go and tell your main supervisor that is allocated to you, that is responsible for signing in your institutional documents to say, I have a person. Now, if she says yes and she's ignorant and you didn't even read the policy, you get a person that's co-supervising for free because they can't even be acknowledged as a co-supervisor in the front page because the university hasn't allowed them to supervise that project. So it is very important to have those conversations. How many co-supervisors are you allowed to have, and can you have them across countries? It goes to that question that you've got to see the supervision policy of the institution, if they allow, because some institutions you might find that a person is actually a research associate at Rhodes University, so that means to some extent they can engage in research at Rhodes University. Because remember, when you graduate, there is, I forgot what they call them, but it goes to a university, including some funds that goes to the university where you are graduating, and your supervisor actually gets to benefit from that, because that's why then they are able to apply for senior lecturing. They get asked how many students have you supervised to finishing, as well as professorship. So there are those politics that are behind the acceptance of a person as a co-supervisor or not. So I know that one, you can have 3 supervisors. It depends on different projects and different disciplines, but also the much more prevalent one now is supervision panels, where you have a supervision panels that is comprised of co-supervisors, and then you have your supervisor and your co-supervisor. The panels are there to offer external different view of your research, because they don't engage with your research quite more often, so that they can see, are you making progress in your thinking, and also are you making progress in terms of your research? Yeah. So how does the supervisor, as well as, oh, my camera is not on, sorry. How does the supervisor and the student role change or adjust from a master's level to a PhD level? In actual fact, we were told that a master's thesis is a thesis that is there to teach you how to do research. I want to argue that that is not the case. I mean, what actually teaches you about the structure of research is honors. So a master's, depending on what kind, be it a master's by dissertation or be it a master's by coursework, and that relationship shifts based on that. So if it's by coursework, that means you are attending different modules, accountable to different lecturers in terms of submission of their work, but at the same time, you have a research project. So meaning your supervision agreement with your supervisor has to incorporate the other modules that you need to focus on. That goes to your submission deadlines, that goes to your co-authorship, because what happens if you want to co-author with one of the lecturers of your master's coursework module on something? So co-authorship is not about anything and everything that you publish must have a co-author of your supervisor. It is co-authorship based on the project that you and your supervisor are working on. Same applies with the PhD. There are PhDs, for example, the one I was in 2020, we were doing pre-doc that had different modules. And from those different modules, you would learn that I would love to work more with a certain person that is not in your supervision team. You continue to approach them. You work with them on something different that has got nothing to do with your research, because that open communication allows you to go to your supervisor and pitch the idea just for advice, to say, you know, I've decided to also work with Asiphe on this paper about something else that has nothing to do with your PhD. Remember, like any other contract, it must be revisited. It must be reviewed. And the only way that it could be reviewed is by asking a meeting, formal emails to actually ensure that this is the contract we're working with now, and communication with your supervisor. And then the last question is, in your own experience, what are things to avoid when engaging with the supervisor or co-supervisor that can lead to conflict? Entitlement. The huge thing, entitlement. When you have someone that is set to supervise you, if you have entitlement, you're gonna have entitlement to their time, you're gonna have entitlement to their resources, you're gonna have entitlement to their research, and that is one thing that's gonna set you back. Because from that entitlement changes tone. If you think you are entitled to receive feedback, there's high chances that the tone that you will be using will change because of entitlement. At the same time, avoid the breaking of boundaries. When your supervisor is giving you projects, they must know, Asiphe as a person of boundaries, that she's not going to do something that is not clear how she is going to benefit out of it. So if I usually see memes of PhD candidates holding different projects, and then I ask myself, what are you getting from these different projects? Because to some extent, it might be that the supervisor has misunderstood the meaning of mentorship to a point where, in their minds, making you do research for their research grant that has got nothing to do with your PhD and nothing to do with any benefits for you is a form of mentoring you on how to do grants, because you haven't set those boundaries. So when you set your boundaries, even when you communicate with your supervisor about personal matters in your life, it comes from a place of making them understand why you can't do A, B, C, and D. But it doesn't come from a place where you are trying to make them your friend or your mother. But most importantly, 3, your supervisor is not your psychologist, your supervisor is not your mother. There's a beautiful paper by a good friend of mine, Postgraduate at DAO, titled, Can I Call You Pro Forma? It comes from the idea of how, to some extent, we put pressure to Black women or even women in academia to perform duties of mothering in research, in classes, and in academia, which is an unpaid emotional labor. And that comes from those boundaries. So do not crucify academics when they set their own boundaries, because they know what they're protecting themselves of, the emotional unpaid labor. So make sure that you have your own therapist. You can ask them for advice in terms of which therapists are in town. Rhodes University has got free wellness center therapy sessions that you can book on your own. You can alert them that you are going through therapy about this, and this is why you are slow, but your supervisor is not your therapist. Your supervisor is not your mother or your father. They are there to supervise. It is a job. It is a relationship. It is a mentorship to develop both you and them. I hope that was clear. I don't see any hands. Do we have any hands? Okay, Nzika, I'll send it to you now. But you can search her name as well. Let me write it here so that you can engage with it. Okay, do we have any questions just before making announcements? Okay, we have Joy. Go ahead, Joy.
Thank you so much, Asiphe, for this presentation. It's very helpful. I was a very consistent member of the CPGS. Whatever I want to say is just a comment. I don't want people to suffer what I suffered. When she mentioned trauma, I went through trauma. So in the section where Asiphe talked about provide academic guidance and feedback, support research development, please, I want to talk about academic wisdom. Open your eyes very well. Not all supervisors have the intention to provide what has been mentioned. So you need to open, this is PhD, open your eyes very well. If some supervisors know that you already have a background information on research, you become a threat. And if you're a Black woman, God help you, it increases. So you need to know how to navigate your space. I would say that build your own team. Work with people who are interested in your work and in your research. And please, if you notice that the person is not, just keep your mouth shut and withdraw quietly. You know what I mean? Withdraw quietly. If somebody, you notice that somebody is not interested in your work, you really don't have any business to do with that person. So because that's what I went through. She mentioned trauma. It is very traumatic. I don't want any of you to go through that phase. So if you notice that your supervisor, you know what I mean? I've just spoken in parables. The other thing I want to say is about maintaining on your role as a PhD candidate. When you talk about open communication, what Asiphe said, it's very serious. Don't expect in your communication, know where to draw the line. You might think this person really, I'm speaking as a Black female academic woman. In your communication, when it's open communication, I beg you, this is PhD. It's true that they're supposed to do certain things, but like you know, in life, it's not everyone that is interested in, they even want you to fall off, so you leave academia for them. I mean, that is for some people. Why some people like, you know, Professor Sio Makina, I give her thumbs up. You can see that I am always coming back, because I was greatly supported. I mean, Prof had seminar for just 6 of us. We came, Prof, we need a seminar. We can say, no, Prof, we're going to have that seminar. You can see it's always bringing me back. It's always bringing, because of the kind of support that I got. This open communication thing, please know how to manage that communication, or else people will just hold you by your words. It's just, this is my own little contribution to you know, PhD first year. It can be very challenging sometimes, but you just know how to navigate your space. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for that. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying, that take ownership of your research. It's something that I always say to postgrad students who don't want to present to conferences, that only you know your research. Take ownership to your research. But the other important thing is that there's work that I'm doing, which I'm developing further, that looks at decolonizing research and research methodologies. And my main thing in decolonizing research and research methodologies comes from what type of an academic do I want to be? And the type of an academic that I want to be is one that understands that, one, I cannot transfer the trauma that I received from supervision down. So I'm decolonizing that trauma. That means I'm going to attend short courses on how to supervise. There's a short course at Rhodes, and we encourage PhD students to actually attend that, whether they have started supervising or not. But also, to ensure that you deal with your own trauma before coming into another study, because those can develop feelings of inadequacy. And by the time you finish your PhD, you supervise the same way that you've been supervised. So if you were supervised just like me, there's high chances that I'll turn out well, because that's the supervision I received in PhD. But at the same time, I'm not building my own identity as a supervisor or building different relationships with students, because supervision relationships cannot be the same. That means you are not giving yourself time as a supervisor to learn about the other person. So there will be students that will be sending a different page, a different chapter, a paragraph of an email that I need to try and be open with, because that's the supervision agreement that you might have had. So I hope the people that are here do not become the bad supervisors they've met along the way, but actually have taken the lessons to ensure that others do not go through the same journey again. I think Uveli had their hand up. Are you able to come in, or do they leave already? Yes, go on, Pilsip.
Hi, Sisi. No, thank you very much. I just wanted to echo what the other colleagues have said. You know, your session has been really eye-opening and informative. And I think we do need such sessions that capacitate us in this journey. So thank you very much, soon to be doctor.
Crossing fingers. Thank you very much for that. There's another project that I'm working on, which is a postgrad support group that will be facilitated by the Wellness Center, hopefully. So there we are able to engage, to debrief, to vent, to assist each other in terms of our postgrad journey, because also that is where people learn that other supervisors do this, and therefore maybe I can ask my supervisor to do this. And of course, knowing very well they might not want to say yes. So those are very important. But please do go and check our emails so that if you are a Rhodes University registered PhD student, you can enter into a competition that we've recently advertised. I'm going to advertise it tomorrow again, which is a hashtag 3-minute thesis competition by Synod. A winner from internally stands a chance to go to Denmark on a full expenses paid trip to win more prizes there on that side, representing the continent as well as our country. So please join in 3 minutes. You present your thesis in 3 minutes. And if you would like some training and support to actually make you to submit that, we are here. We can submit that to you because we are not part of the adjudication people. So the adjudicators are outside. It's various deans and DVC and the VC as well, who is going to be looking at the videos to choose the person that will represent Rhodes University in the selection process at Synod. But from my side, please do evaluate our workshops and do look out on our communication. Follow us on social media. I sound like a YouTube person, but please subscribe on our YouTube channel. And thank you very much. I'll share my direct email here so that you can email me. And if you are not part of the CPGS mailing list, please email me so that I can send you, so that I can add you as well as send you some things that we are sharing at CPGS. For example, I started this whole exciting thing that every Fridays I send opportunities to postgrad students in the CPGS mailing list that I've come across, be it jobs, be it conferences, be it call for papers, be it funding, anything that I come across. And yeah, so there's so many things that you could be missing out on for not being part of the mailing list. But thank you very much for being here and for staying, even though we've extended the time with 20 minutes. Have a great day. And thank you, Asiphe, for making sure that we have this program. Thanks.